today we're going to talk about chapter 3 in the book club, and that is identifying your attachment style. So I'm just going to again kind of go over that. And so some of you are really familiar with this information already and maybe want more kind of advanced next level knowledge. And some of you are really new to this, maybe haven't even finished reading the book altogether, and maybe have more kind of beginner questions. There's kind of different layers of relationship work and different layers of working on the relationship through the lens of attachment. So there's always more to learn. So I'm going to try to kind of tailor the information to as broadly as possible. So once I think what I'm going to try to do today is, as I go through the slides, take a pause and take questions about the slide. And, hopefully we can work it in a way that some of the questions are sort of basic and some of the questions are more complicated. And I'm going to just briefly answer the question and then get back into the slideshow and move forward. And then at the end, I'll open it up to a Q&A. I have a little more time today. I don't have to do a hard stop. So for those of you who want to stick around and ask some more questions that maybe are, hold on one sec, that are maybe beyond the scope of what we're doing here today. All right, so let's go back. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our presentation. And then Katrina, you're going to kind of try to bring me some questions that kind of hit those different levels of understanding. And so we have someone asked, do we have video recordings? Yes, you can find a recording of the last 2 chapters. You can go to my website, thesecurerelationship.com, where you can find all the recordings and just a lot of other resources there too. All right, we're going to share. Okay, hopefully everyone can see. Katrina, just reach out to me if there's any kind of visual issue. All right, so today we're going to jump into chapter 3, identifying your attachment style. And so, just to go back and review a little bit of what we did last week, but we're going to expand upon it. Attachment theory means that we have 4 categories of one's attachment style, meaning the nature of the fears they feel in their relationship and how they behave in what they do and how they attempt to regulate their fears in the relationship. So we have secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. And this all exists on a spectrum. And, these labels they're meant to create insight. They're not meant to box anyone in. And when I say insight, I mean as a template to know what to work on, right? And not everybody's going to fit perfectly into one category. And that's okay, because if you have an insecure attachment, you just have to know that somehow you're managing your feelings in a way that isn't so healthy. And you need to shift that. And sometimes instead of looking at what category I am, you just need to look at what symptoms do I have of my insecure attachment and what do I need to do to minimize those symptoms and become secure within myself and within my relationship. The goal is always the same, which is that an earned, secure attachment with yourself and your own feelings and with your partner. And anybody can get there with work. All right. So what is the attachment security with self? Okay. So that means your attachment, your relationship to yourself is how you respond to your own self. Can you access your emotions? Can you self-support your emotions? Can you self-regulate? Are you in touch with them? And we can't communicate our emotions effectively with others if we don't have access to them or ability to regulate them to begin with. And another, aspect of self-secure attachment is positive self-beliefs and health, right? You generally you do confront yourself and confront some of your behaviors, and you're willing to work on yourself, absolutely, but you're not like mired in shame. Your failures in life don't turn into I'm a failure or I'm just unlovable because this person can't love me. So you generally have a positive sense of self-worth. And then self-insecure attachment on the other side of the coin means you have difficulty accessing your deeper emotions. You tend to get stuck and your pain turns into anger and anxiety, and you tend to get stuck in anger, anxiety, and either you just have no idea what's underneath that to begin with, or you can't regulate it enough. You can't regulate the anxiety enough in a moment to get down to the deeper stuff, which leaves us with difficulty self-supporting and poor communication because we often just don't know what we're supposed to be communicating, and then a lot of negative self-beliefs and shame that accompany the negative self-beliefs. Again, it's not, oh, I failed, oh, I messed up, oh, I wish I could change this. It's I failed and I messed up and I can't change because I'm just fundamentally flawed. There's just something off about me. I'll never be okay. I was just born bad. I was just born selfish, or any of these things that people tell themselves, not about their behavior, but about their actual personhood. Okay, let's see if we have, Katrina, do you have any questions that you want to send my way?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, so we have a spectrum here, right? These attachment styles, they're not they're you know, they go from really unhealthy to mild, okay? And so the worst kind of attachment style, and when I say worst, I don't mean the person who has it is bad by any stretch of the imagination. Nobody asks for this stuff. But I mean, it's the most painful and it's probably going to be the most dysfunctional in a relationship. But really, more importantly, it's the most painful. People with disorganized attachment are just simply in a lot of pain a lot more of the time. Usually there's just a lot of mistrust for others that, is there even in many different contexts, even if there's not a ton of evidence to not trust a person, even before they know a person, they go into things with mistrust because they have been so harmed by relationships. Their ability to cope and regulate is usually lower. It always is, I should say, lower than those who are more in, towards this end of the secure spectrum. You're going to see less predictability. You're going to see more exaggerated behaviors. Um, some anxious, some avoidant, some dysregulated. You're going to see a lot of dysregulated and some dissociated is what I meant to say. Sometimes people will just be super flat because one way they deal with their intense feelings is just flat. And then other times they're just dealing with their intense feelings by not being able to deal with them. And so they just get super dysregulated and act out in really big ways. Sometimes maybe the acting out isn't so extreme, but the pain is still high. And you're going to just see a lot of inner conflict. And then we move into, the anxious spectrum, and the avoidant spectrum is down here. And you're just going to see more extreme behavior. Someone with a high anxious attachment is going to feel anxious more of the time. They're going to act in bigger ways. They're going to have a harder time seeing their own part. Someone with a higher avoidant attachment, they're going to be more shut down. They're going to be more disengaged from their own feelings. They're going to be more defensive and all of these things. And then again, we go into moderate, where now, we're starting to see distress at periods of time, especially when it's really difficult topics, but also times when things are okay. And, it's not black or white, right? They're moving toward secure. They're becoming more flexible, less rigid about the way they regulate. In the past over here, there's a lot of rigidity. The way to deal with your emotions is just shut them off or somehow avoid them. Now, when we get over here, the person's becoming a little more engaged, willing to share more, open up more, better able to access their feelings. Up here, sometimes someone with an anxious attachment who was previously here, they start to be a little more avoidant sometimes because they have now this other tool to manage their feelings, which is sometimes putting them away. And sometimes we need to balance that out and find that middle ground. And then we go over here to mild, where, it still shows up, but it's not so intense. It's not so damaging. We can come back faster. Sometimes in this place, you're going to see bouncing around from anxious to avoidant strategies because we can do both now. And then you're going to move into secure, where you're in these places very seldomly. You know how to get out. You generally feel good within your own body and your relationship. You generally feel safe and connected to your partner the vast majority of the time, with the understanding that sometimes there are ruptures. Most relationships, the vast majority, 99.9% of relationships will have ruptures from time to time. Even if it's a super secure attachment, it's just they can get back to their baseline security faster. Okay, Katrina, any questions for me?
Not yet. You can continue on.
Okay. Okay, so attachment styles are almost always rooted in childhood in some way, right? Most of the time, they don't just appear out of thin air in adulthood or even appear in hard relationships in adulthood. There are some exceptions to that. Now, there is a very good chance that insecure attachment from childhood can be worsened during adulthood. The patterns are still there, but the relationship is toxic to the degree that it just, exaggerates everything. And certainly, relationships where both partners have an insecure attachment, they will reinforce each other's insecure attachment. Most people develop these kind of unhealthy ways to cope with their unmet relationship needs and the pain that results from that. Most people develop these coping mechanisms somewhere in childhood. And, again, adult relationships can make them better or worse. And to put this out there, there is a lot of truth to the fact that healthy relationships can make them better. And the goal for my work with everybody is to bolster the relationship to a point where it actually heavily impacts and reinforces both partners' security. And each partner can do that with each other. Each partner can contribute to that and has their own role in that. And the way that we do that is how we're navigating communication, how we're navigating cycles to create positive cycles instead of negative cycles. One of the things is that people who have a secure attachment in childhood, they just naturally know to seek that in adulthood. They don't have to really think about it. They just know what the felt sense of security and emotional responsiveness from a partner feels like. And they also know how to be a healthy, supportive partner. Now, are there exceptions? Absolutely. Some people, for whatever reason, they find themselves in relationships with other people who are so toxic that it actually starts impacting their relationship with themselves to the degree that they lose the ability to manage their emotions with a health, and then they become insecure. So that does happen, but most of the time, that's not what I see. All right, so we've got anxious attachment. Let me. Oh, someone says, is disorganized attachment the same as fearful avoidant? Yes. So let me explain that. So the very original, the first attachment style research was done in the late 70s, early 80s. And from that research, these researchers named Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main and John Bowlby contributed heavily to the theory. And so they started researching and they developed from attachment theory these four categories. They observed how these children reacted to a stressful situation with their caregiver. And they found that a portion of the children reacted with anxious behaviors, a portion of the children reacted with avoidant behaviors, a portion reacted with secure behaviors, and another portion acted with these disorganized behaviors. And so they labeled it that anxious, or actually they labeled it anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant. Then, as the field progressed, it kind of the attachment research kind of divided, and we had the people who were clinicians and kind of following that early researcher line that stuck with the original terms, and then we had more people who were like more related to social psychology and educational psychology, and they decided to come up with different terms that made more sense to them, which was I know fearful avoidant is one. I can't even think of the other ones. Oh gosh, I know, these terms like the back of my hand, and of course I can't think of them right now. But anyway, fearful avoidant is what they applied to what other people call disorganized. I sometimes you just choose and you have to stay consistent with yourself. I don't really care what terms people use. At the end of the day, they all kind of mean the same thing. There's arguments people will make for keeping it the original terms, good arguments for that. There's good arguments that people will make for using the other term. So whatever term works for you. But yes, just know that if I say disorganized, it means also fearful avoidant. Okay, so now we have avoidant attachment. Hold on one second. I missed it. Anxious. Okay, so anxious attachment. All right, so first of all, in the chapter, we talk about what creates the anxious attachment, the childhood environment. And I'd love some questions about that if you have them. I didn't go too deeply into it with this slideshow, but ultimately, we're going to have a child that has unmet emotional needs, period. They don't feel heard, they don't feel understood for their emotions, they don't feel validated for their emotions. And what happens is that creates insecurity. And the insecurity is I don't know if anybody's really going to be here to help me with my emotions or not. And now I feel really insecure. And I haven't learned to help myself with my emotions because nobody else is there modeling it to me or even teaching it to me. So I always feel kind of angsty and bad. And there's just usually, or always with anxious attachment, there's a strong flavor of emotional validation. It's less than just ignoring your emotions and more of your emotions are irrational, your emotions aren't welcome here, your emotions are bad, your emotions are selfish, your emotions threaten me to the degree that I get dysregulated as a parent. Your emotions are going to be punished, or your emotions are just too much, right? And all of that is emotional abandonment. Emotional abandonment means not leaning in and helping someone with their emotions. And when that person is a child, it's really important that most of the time a parent is doing that. And as the child grows, they learn to increase their capacity to do that for themselves. But those with anxious attachment, they don't really get the opportunity to develop the capacity to do it for themselves because nobody has been there helping them do it from early on. Um, all right. Someone says, can you develop insecure attachment styles as an adult? Yes. So I did just say that. I'll go back. So if you look here, it says some people become insecure in adult relationships. Yes. Again, most people who find themselves in insecure relationships probably found themselves there because they have some stuff from childhood that kind of led them to that point, but not always. There are lots of different ways that people can take twists and turns in life. And yes, some people do start off with a relatively secure attachment and they somehow find themselves in a toxic relationship. And that makes their relationship with self all wonky. And then they become very insecure. So yes, it absolutely can happen. But again, I don't see that happen a lot. I see typically people go into relationships with some of this stuff that gets either worsened or just reinforced by other insecure partners. Um, so someone says how to know if a partner is reacting a certain way to their attachment style or a different reason is Asperger's or another psychological concern. Well, it's really attachment is really more about how one is handling their own emotions and how one is communicating their emotions, right? So you can have someone with, some sort like depression, for example, who they are depressed. It's very clear, and they aren't able to emotionally engage because they are depressed. However, um, you can be depressed and communicate about your depression in a way that is indicative of a secure attachment, right? That's going to sound like this isn't about you. Something in my body just feels cut off. It's horrible. I'm in a lot of pain. And I understand that this is very difficult for you. And this is, like really hard for both of us. Okay. That's very different from handling depression in a way that is like, uh, getting defensive. You shouldn't be upset about it. You should be more tolerant, or even shame spiraling. I don't deserve help from you. I'm somehow failing to have this depression. Or just not communicating at all, not getting help. That's a way of reacting to the depression in a way that's more indicative of that insecure attachment. Usually there's tons of overlap. A lot of times, when I see people, they don't just have this insecure attachment with themselves and with each other. They have other stuff going on. They have personal issues going on. And those personal issues need to be dealt with, and we need to be dealt with how those personal issues are showing up in the relationship. So yes, Asperger's would be a situation where that person is probably going to have more challenges. Will definitely have more challenges, knowing about their emotions, communicating their emotions, and responding to the emotions of others. That doesn't mean they can't do it. It just means they have to get some special help, probably, to learn how to do that because they have more of a challenge than someone who is, not neurodivergent. Um, Difference between avoidant and emotionally abusive. Well, anybody who's emotionally abusive is going to have insecure attachment because that emotional abuse is a symptom of insecure attachment. Nobody ever emotionally abuses that has a secure attachment. It just doesn't happen. They don't need to get their needs met in that way. So, the emotional abuse is the behavior. The avoidant attachment is the way that person stuffs their feelings in a way. They're not managing their feelings in a way that they're communicating them with health. Instead, they're communicating them with emotional abuse. And so there could be other factors. Why is this person, choosing to be emotionally abusive with their feelings instead of communicating in the healthy way? What's going on with them as a person, and what's going on in a negative cycle that both partners are contributing to that is creating a symptom of emotional abuse? And there's there's no truth to the fact that someone with an avoidant attachment is more emotionally abusive than someone with an anxious attachment. Maybe if you just picked, two random people from the crowd, one person who is avoidant might be more emotionally abusive than this person that we picked out that is anxious. But overall, as a whole, all of this attachment insecurity contributes to some level of emotional, quote unquote, abuse, which is emotional dysfunction. Um, how to to know the difference between disorganized attachment and being flexible. One is very dysfunctional, one is healthy. If you're, able to regulate and have different ways of regulating your body, and you can communicate with your partner in a healthy way, and you're getting results from that, and your negative cycles are stabilizing, that means that we're moving towards secure. If that flexibility is not really flexibility, but dysregulation and chaos, and that is disorganized attachment. All right. So back to the anxious attachment. So those with anxious attachment as children, what they learn is to cope with their pain, the pain of emotional abandonment, the pain of, just not having their needs met. They cope with their pain by moving in, getting big, getting externalizing behaviors, right? Emotional acting out, anger, anxiety, anything they can do to be seen and responded to. They just feel desperate. Um, Sometimes that's people pleasing, right? That's an externalizing behavior. Try to kind of control others' happiness with me so I can feel seen and feel loved and feel valuable, even at to the detriment of my own self growth. Um, and this is can happen on a spectrum. Some children are going to do these in a bigger way than others. Some kids who are anxious are going to lean more towards people pleasing, and some are going to lean more towards demands and protest. There's different nuances of environments that might reward different behaviors. And yeah, so it's just fueled by, you usually can see once you have a trained eye, it's pretty easy to see an anxiously attached kid because the behaviors are real noticeable. And you know, um, the behaviors as in childhood typically of anxious partners is they're making their parents matter. Again, if there's the people pleasing, you know, subset of this, then it's probably not making the parents matter, but a fear of making the parents matter and having to really toe the line to not. Um, and their behaviors tend to push their parents further away because their parents don't know how to cope with it because of what they've created, really. And so what happens is the further the parents go away or the angrier the parents get, the more anxious they get. And now they're in a cycle with their parents. The difference between a parent-child relationship and a romantic partner relationship is the parents are usually they're responsible for better or worse for behaving in a way that contributed to the development of their child's attachment style. And they're also the ones that are responsible for doing something to reverse it. That doesn't mean parents are bad who have a child with an insecure attachment. It just means they probably have one themselves and they just haven't had the tools to not do that. And, my belief is that most parents tend to do the best they can with what they have. I mean, there's some parents out there that have done some really, really, really awful things, and I don't want to get them off the hook, but most of the time, most parents do the best they can with what they have. And um, all right. And so what happens is in this anxious attachment, these patterns of trying to get needs met go on into the adults' relationships. And oftentimes, those with anxious attachment will find themselves in relationships with those with avoidant attachment. I won't go into why unless you want to ask me that, but that's typically what happens. Most most distressed relationships are anxious avoidant. Um, that doesn't mean they're doomed. That's what I do every day, many hours a day, is help these couples heal, help them become secure out of their anxious avoidant dynamic. I know that it's possible because the vast majority of the couples that I work with get there. Okay, so I know it's possible. And what a lot of times with anxious attachment, there's this emotional void that they never learned to fill with self work. And so then they put a lot of pressure on the relationship to do all the work, not just be the partner who's emotionally supportive, but also helping them do all the work, do all the emotional work, which some of it is self work. What that does is they're pulling for too much. And often their partner doesn't know how to give anything at all. So, of course, that makes it worse. But they're pulling for too much and they don't know where this line is. And then that puts a lot of pressure on the relationship. Sometimes it's worse than others. Seeking constant reassurance that their partner is going to be available to them and that they aren't asking for too much, and usually just really highly attuned to their partner's emotional state and whether or not their partner is available to them in a given moment. That can be very distressing for them. They have a hard time tolerating just even isolated moments where their partner might need some space or might be in kind of a grumpy mood. That can feel like the end of the world to them or very permanent. And that causes distress. And then with that distress, they move in, close the distance, get desperate, get demanding, sometimes controlling. This doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're reacting to their own feelings and they're reacting to, real problems in the relationship that their partner is contributing to, but they're not reacting to that in a way that was really going to help them get their needs met. And it's because they don't know how. Even if they intellectually know how to do it different, they don't know how to help their own body to get to the point that they can actually do it differently. Usually, those with anxious attachment have high other blame. That doesn't mean that they don't recognize they have a role, but they skew heavily toward my partner really needs to be the one to change here. And if they can really just change, then I wouldn't have to get so upset at the expense of maybe I need to figure out how to help myself not get so upset, in addition to wanting them to be better. There's equal weight on both. And then, look, in these anxious avoidant dynamics with the partnership, the partner is almost always somehow a significant contributor to their partner's anxious attachment, right? Um, Actually, I'm sorry, that's meant to say anxious right there. Sorry about that. But yes, their partner is almost always contributing and reinforcing that to one degree or another. But almost always they didn't create it, right? They have a role in maintaining it, but they didn't create it. And so there is plenty of self work that needs to be done with the anxious partner, and there's plenty of relationship work that needs to be done. And if there is an avoidant partner, there's plenty of self work that they need to be doing. See if we have any questions here. Okay, someone asked a great question. How do different cultural backgrounds affect attachment styles? Okay, here's the simple answer. Feelings of pain are universally human. Emotions are universally human. Sadness, grief, anger, fear. Okay, just joy and surprise. I'm not an emotional theorist, right? So I'm not always going to get all of the perfect little nuances right with that. But generally speaking, those are universal human emotions, right? You don't survive as a human without having those emotional pain signals to inform how you navigate through life. It's just like if you don't, you have to feel physical pain to know how to stay alive physically. There are people who don't feel physical pain, that they're very rare, but they don't live very long because they don't know how to keep their body safe. They get infections, they have tons of broken bones. Same with emotions. We have to have emotional experience to keep us safe in the world. So just know that it doesn't matter what culture you're in, you have emotions. Okay. Now, how do you get to the pain? That's where we have these cultural differences. Different cultures make different meanings of different behaviors and different things and have different sort of expectations and different surface level things that keep them feeling emotionally safe. Okay. And so the culture is going to determine how they get to the emotions. And sometimes there's overlap, you know. Usually, if someone's screaming in your face, it doesn't matter what culture you're in, that's going to hurt. But there's all kinds of nuances. So different cultures just have different ways of getting into the universal experience of pain. Um, all right. So avoidant, oh, actually, here. When you're moving from insecure to secure, Now, I don't know if this person means in the relationship, but I'll go ahead and answer in the relationship. Fewer negative cycles, increased feelings of closeness. When you do have negative cycles, and we'll talk more about those in subsequent chapters. And next chapter, we're going to dive into what is this negative cycle. And so it's basically conflict. For now, just know negative cycles are fights or just extreme feelings of disconnection. So you have that fewer, less often, fewer and farther between. Um, you re- they're not as bad when they happen. You're not like going to the ugliest places more consistently. Sometimes couples backtrack and they might be doing great and then have this terribly ugly fight. That doesn't necessarily mean they're they're not growing in the big picture. But in the big picture, we're less intense. We're getting less distressed, and we're able to repair faster because we're able to really recognize what actually happened and bring our new emerging communication skills into the repair process, and just general feelings of more closeness and safety in the relationship. But a real tangible way to assess it is, how are we doing with our negative cycles? Okay. And so with an avoidant attachment, you're going to typically, I'm going to see two really consistent styles of consistent home environments during childhood. One is going to be high levels of disengagement, where nobody in the family really does emotions. We just kind of operate by stuffing them down. Nobody really ever talks about emotions. Maybe we have that one sister who's always sort of dysregulated, or that one brother who's always getting in trouble at school and has serious ADD, but that's just them, that's just how they were born. Probably not. That person in the system is probably expressing the emotions for all the other people who aren't expressing emotions. And it's just not something we do. It's just not something we will learn to do. And not only that, we're actually rewarded for pushing our emotions down or hiding them and not talking about them. We're rewarded by not rocking the boat, not threatening, not getting messages of shame or punishment or whatever. And then there's this other thing that can really contribute heavily to avoidant attachment. And that's when parents are too emotionally enmeshed. They're too interested in their child regulating their own emotions, or trying to invade their child's emotions or invade their child's privacy, and just to a real extreme level. And then that child just learns to shove it all down because I'm gonna, if I put too much out there, I'm just gonna get swallowed whole by this other person. And they learn to just retreat from an early age. And then their coping mechanisms are anything to just stave away the pain, right? You just don't go to sadness, don't go to frustration or rejection or whatever feeling it is that's not okay in their system, or that's not going to be supported in their system. There's no healthy way to cope. So the only other option is put it over here. It's very subconscious. Nobody chooses to do this. I think some people are more temperamentally prone to handling their emotions with avoidance, and some are more temperamentally prone to handling their painful emotions anxiously. But however you get there, that's what avoidant attachment looks like. A lot of times, those with avoidant attachment, especially as children, will either find things that are constantly distracting them, like video games or toys or whatever, and just kind of keeps them quiet, or highly successful academic, sports, career, hobbies. You're usually not going to see someone with avoidant attachment getting in a ton of trouble and drawing a lot of attention to themselves, at least consistently. And then these patterns go into adult relationships, because if you are used to having to emotionally disengage in order to stay safe with yourself, then you're going to deal with your partner's emotions in the same way you deal with your own. And it's going to be really confusing to you why your partner isn't okay with that, because your MO is emotional disconnection. And on top of that, one of the things your partner may have been attracted to about you is your emotional stability. So now you go into the relationship and all of a sudden you start disagreeing about things and your partner's upset and you just don't know what to do. Because you're used to just making their emotions go away. And so you're trying, I mean, your own emotions go away. And so what you're trying to do is, well, let's just make their emotions go away too, and or ignore them. And obviously, that is going to be very triggering to an anxious partner because that's not what they're needing. Okay. And then they get all big and loud and protesty or whatever, criticizing, and then that doesn't feel good for the avoidant partner. And then they react in a way that's not so healthy. And then on and on the cycle is going. Um, there are blaming avoidant partners. And it's never black or white. Plenty of avoidant partners do go to a place of blame, especially in the midst of conflict. However, avoidant people are more likely at the end of the day to circle back to it's really just all my fault. It's all on me because they have such a sense of responsibility of and independence, emotional independence, and self reliance. So that self reliance is going to keep them circling back to it's really me when there is some value in recognizing this is a cycle that we're both contributing to. When someone has an avoidant attachment and they're in a relationship, it's almost a guarantee that their partner is also contributing to their avoidant attachment style and reinforcing that. But again, they probably didn't create it. They have a role, but usually this stuff is present to some degree. Yeah. So someone says, can you repeat the core fears of each attachment style? Yeah. So with anxious attachment, the core fear is emotional or physical abandonment. Um, Fear of emotional abandonment is enough. There are plenty of people out there that are in a partnership and they have an anxious attachment and they just know my partner's not going to leave me. They'll never leave me, right? But they are always emotionally abandoning me. They're always leaving me feeling invalidated and unheard and misunderstood and not comforted. And that is very painful. And then there are also those who are anxiously attached that not only are being emotionally abandoned, but they also have a threat of physical abandonment or they've been physically abandoned. And that's even worse, right? And so the core fear, what they're going to notice more is emotional abandonment. And as they become healthier, they start to get more in touch with other fears, right? But it's more balanced fears instead of all of it just being around preventing abandonment. Um, and then with avoidant attachment, the core fear is of failing and not just of failing. It's of seeing self as a failure or being seen by others as a failure. And that is going to bring up feelings of fear and rejection and all kinds of painful stuff. So, those with avoidant attachment are typically trying to stay one step ahead of failure and the shame that is embedded into failure for them. And then with disorganized attachment, the core fear is usually just like, with a disorganized attachment, there's never one complete answer. But if I had to give one complete answer, I would say two things. I wouldn't give one complete answer. I would give two complete answers. It's one, their own body is a not safe place. They never know when these intense things are going to come up in them. So they're afraid of their own body and they're afraid of other people. And they're afraid that everybody out there in some way or another has the capacity to really quickly trigger what's going to come up in my own body. Everybody out there has the capacity to hate me and reject me and abandon me. And because that has been my experience over and over again in life, and especially growing up. How can parents help their children avoid or reverse insecure attachment? Well, it's pretty simple and it's pretty possible. Start showing up emotionally for them. I know that's easier, sounds easier than it is, but once you learn how to listen, how to understand, how to be validating, and balance that out with good boundaries, everything starts clicking into place. And it's just like all right, instead of yelling at them for being rude, right? You're able to go, "Hey, help me understand what's going on with you. You're being rude. Clearly you have something important to say, and it might take a while for them to feel safe to express that, but hopefully you're able to work through the blocks and help them to say, "Well, I'm mad at you," or "Well, this," or "Well, that." And you're able to kind of lean into that and, "All right, I hear you, and I'm going to apologize for my role in that," right? And then you come in with, at the same time, I'm your parent, and to keep you safe, we're going to have to set some boundaries around some of this stuff. My job as a parent is to give you some limits, and I know that's hard, but we got to do that. So it's about being emotionally supportive, but not at the expense of structure and limits. And it's not setting structure and limits or having no structure and limits with this emotionally unsafe behavior and lots of anger and punitiveness. Um, why are anxiously attached and avoidantly attached people attracted to each other? Well, because they balance each other out. Too anxious is going to have so much energy that it's not going to be sustainable. And one of two things is going to happen. Either one partner is going to start leaning toward avoidance, and probably the lesser anxious of the two, um, or they're going to break up. Okay. And they're going to end up in some level of an anxious avoidant relationship. And if they're both avoidant, probably it's just not enough trying to fill the void by either partner. So typically what's going to happen is they're just going to drift apart and end up just kind of being roommates, or they're going to split up and find someone who helps them feel alive, or one partner is going to take on more of the anxious role as a way of trying to balance out the system. Okay, so disorganized attachment. Um, you know, the probably the most common factor of a disorganized attachment is the source of love is the source of danger. And if we call environments that create anxious and avoidant attachment emotionally insensitive, we call disorganized attachment environments emotionally dangerous. Okay. These are more like dangerous environments. Like you're going to really suffer if you rock the boat. You're going to get really big messages coming at you of shame and punishment. You're going to get physically hurt. You might get sexually hurt, sadly. It's just there's just less safety. Okay. And what this does is it creates enormous conflict in a child because here you are, you're a child and you're supposed to be able, to rely on your parents for love and support because you can't survive in the world on your own. You're wired to need them, but these people that you need are going to hurt you at any given moment in some way, one way or another. And they're just constantly torn between should I approach, should I retreat? Should I approach, should I retreat? And that creates just a ton of dysregulation. And, there doesn't have to be big, huge trauma in an environment to create a disorganized attachment. There doesn't have to be sexual or physical trauma. Usually there's one or the other. But emotional trauma alone is enough to create a disorganized attachment. And I'm talking trauma. I'm not talking, just like I said, insensitive environment. Usually, sadly, the environments often have a lot of chaos in other ways, just, not a consistent, no consistent structure or low socioeconomic status or, lots of step parents coming in and out. So there's just a lot of layers and a lot of complexity typically in an environment where someone becomes disorganized. And we're all learning coping mechanisms as kids to deal with these big emotions. And, that can be anything for someone with disorganized. They could sometimes just completely numb out and dissociate. Sometimes they get like super dysregulated. It's just, there's such a variety of ways to react to a disorganized attachment. Whereas with anxious and avoidant, you're just going to see more consistency and more predictability of responsiveness. And, when someone has a disorganized attachment, their relationships are going to be more impacted by that. You're going to see more higher conflict, more dysregulation, probably more chaotic, probably more unpredictable. Their partner's going to get push-pull messages. I hate you. Don't leave me. That doesn't have to be spoken in those words, but the behaviors acted out are, I hate you. I'm done with you. I'm want nothing to do with you. And then panic. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. And you can't really grab on to anything. Um, Usually you're going to have high levels of blame and shame and a lot of mistrust of others, like I said. And, you know, disorganized attachment is gonna not be created in a relationship. I've never even seen that. Okay. Disorganized attachment is deeply rooted, and I can't imagine a situation where it doesn't come from childhood unless there's some kind of major event. But with that said, once that person with a disorganized attachment gets in a relationship, the partner can certainly do things that don't help them grow. Okay, and then we have secure attachment. Let me see if we have any questions. Is shame always a part of avoidant attachment? Most of the time, yes. Sometimes you can have people who have a more mild avoidant attachment and they will go to I failed and I hate failing and I don't want to go near failure without crossing that line into I failed because I am a failure. It's the I am a failure that's the shame. And so theoretically, yeah, some people don't go there, right? But most people do, but not everybody. And most of the time, when I hear someone say they don't have shame, they do have shame. They just haven't learned how to find it. And that's more common than someone actually not having shame. But there are situations I have worked with people who they just either don't have a ton of shame, they don't have shame, or they just don't have a ton of it. And then I have people that 90% of the people I work with do somewhere in there carry shame. Okay, so now, oh, secure. Um, all right, so if you have a secure attachment and you developed it in childhood, that means you grew up in a home that was good enough in its emotional supportiveness. It was good enough to help you feel secure, to help you know about your emotions, to help you know that most of the time you're going to get help with your emotions. Maybe not always. Life is, or hopefully not always, actually, because we also, as children, need to learn to take care of our own emotions at times because we don't always have someone there to help us. And so you need to have, 75% of the time I have someone to go to, but 25% of the time I got to learn to regulate myself. I got to learn to be there for myself. That's resilience. People who get their needs met every second, every moment of the pain, every time, sometimes they go into the world without a lot of resilience. So there is such thing as, needing our children to deal with emotional adversity on their own sometimes. Uh, and yeah, so they have the ability to put their emotions to words. They have the ability to comfort their own emotions, and they have the ability to reach for help with their emotions. And they got this ability not from thin air, not because they were born with the ability, but because they had caregivers there, wiser, stronger others there in their life that helped them deal with their emotions, helped them learn how. They made space for their emotions. They talked to them about it. They maybe even if they didn't talk to them about their kids' emotions, they just somehow supported them implicitly. Like they just knew I have some emotional support here. And from that, they learned it's okay to have emotions, it's okay to support them, and it's okay to ask for help. Um, all right. So again, most people are going to develop secure attachment in childhood and end up in those as adults. There are exceptions because sometimes people get in relationships that cause them to feel more insecure. And then many people have an earned secure attachment, meaning they learn to become more secure within their own body and to help their relationship become secure or find a partner that is already secure. I don't love the idea of seeking, if you're single, seeking out someone with a secure attachment and that's, the only thing you're looking for, because I don't know how realistic that is in today's world. And most people aren't super secure, just culturally, we're not so secure. So I always say, look for someone who is willing to work on themselves, willing to work on the relationship, and not just willing, shows evidence of doing so. They're not just giving lip service to it. Those are the kind of people that, you want to kind of seek out in your life. All right, so I do have some little exercises for next time. I said earlier, some of you are at different levels. Some of you are kind of new to this. And if that's you, at the end of each section in chapter 3 of the book are some questions. And so that's your work, is to just go in and make sure you've answered those questions, because you're going to need to know some of that in order to go forward into chapter 4, which is going to be learning about negative cycles and eventually learning how to map out your negative cycle. And you can't know about your negative cycle without knowing about what's going on with you underneath the surface of your behaviors. And you can't know about your partner without really knowing yourself first, because we can recognize in others what we can recognize in ourselves. And then this is for those of you who are more advanced and you're wanting a little more. These are some just deeper dives into the material. I'm not going to read that. I'll let you go ahead and, Katrina, how do we get people a copy of this? I just realized we don't.
They'll have access to the recording later today.
Okay, well, can I get them like a printed version so they don't have to go back into the recording? Maybe screenshot it. Can we email or something?
Screenshotting will be the best
Okay,
option.
so go ahead and just screenshot, and that way you have it out here. And I don't know if I should leave it up right now, or I'll leave it up for a bit. Just go into answering some questions. All right, so why don't we do this? We'll go ahead and hold on one second. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go into questions and feedback. I'd like to know, some of you who've been doing this work, if you have any, not super wordy and not super long, but some kind of like quick feedback to give to others, or just to me even, or just anything that you want to say. I want to make space for that. We do have a lot of people, so I just want to make sure that we get in as many people as we can. Anything that you have to say that you think can contribute to the group experience. And then if you have any questions for me about this material, kind of contain it to attachment styles. You guys are already asking some great questions. Anything that can just enhance your understanding is probably going to enhance understanding of others. And then what I'll do is, I know some of you have some more personal questions. So after, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of answering questions about the chapter, then I'll open it up to some more broad questions. So I'm going to rely on you, Katrina, to send me questions, and then I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm going to look for. Okay, SG. We have an SG. Okay, we'll come back to you, SG. Okay, Alicia.
Have I been allowed in?
Is this SG? Yes, you're here. Alicia, you're next. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted
You're
to give you
welcome.
feedback.
Okay.
I am definitely in a relationship with an avoidant. I am anxious, and I am so very grateful that you have taken on this research and putting out these resources because when couples are looking to heal, you are there. And all of your resources, I was first introduced to your Facebook page, and both my partner and I follow your page. Love, love, love all the insight.
I'm so
And it
glad.
has generated many conversations, and we are healing.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
We have a
That's
long way to
amazing.
go. I
Yep.
love I love that you are helping people identify, make connections, and you give us the resources to heal.
Well, thank you. I deeply appreciate that. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm just so happy that
Yes.
you're able to use this. And I hope that you're able to look at that spectrum and kind of see yourself moving
Yes.
towards. So that's great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Identification is
Yeah.
the big thing.
And do you see that like if, if you just stay consistent with it, that over time it just all keeps clicking, even if
Yes.
go
Yes.
backwards? Okay.
Yes,
All
being
right.
aware, like I said, being aware that we were wounded as children,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean, I'm a parent of three children, and they're
Mm-hmm.
all older now, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what did I do? Right? Like I didn't know this before.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like I feel driven to want to help younger people, be like share all this information with them, like, hey,
Yeah.
here's how to head off some of your problems if you're just aware of these things now. A lot of people break up.
Absolutely.
They break up,
Oh, yeah.
they give up,
Right.
they give up, and there's so much love that could just be healed.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, I have six children, and
Whoa.
I did not figure out how to get this stuff right until my three oldest were older. And I just feel very confident that I was able to come in and reverse it. And
Mm,
I just know I know based on personal experience with my own marriage and with my older three children that I didn't really get it completely right with at the beginning, that this all is really healable. I
yes.
mean, some problems that they have, obviously some things are bigger than attachment, but that attachment bond is very, very healable.
Yes. And
So,
it's great to know that. Very
yeah.
comforting to know that we can heal. And I'm very glad that the universe put your resource in front of me, because you are the main one that I follow.
Oh, well, thank you. I
You are
appreciate
so
that.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the feedback. And
Absolutely.
all right, let's go to, I think we were going to do Alicia. Yeah. Hi, Alicia. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are
Good
you?
to see you. Good.
Wise. I don't see how I can turn on my video, so sorry you don't see my
Good.
face
Well,
right
your face looks like I
now.
always
Okay.
pin it, even if there's just letters. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
looks like I'm looking
I'm
at
talking
talking
to
to you.
someone. Yeah.
You're just frozen. That's all.
Okay. Okay. Good. All right. So yes, I just want to echo what everyone else has said. It's like just so wonderful and really applicable. And for my own situation, I just we're going through a rough season of our marriage, and historically have been the anxious avoidant
Hmm.
couple, and probably got worse over time before we really learned this information,
Hmm.
um,
Yep.
and we've had some attachment ruptures since then, which you kind of have heard about. And I just really feel like we're coming to a reckoning, and
Good.
um, maybe not in a great way.
Oh, I see.
I'm,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard because I think that my husband, has, with like being avoidant, just really is kind of feeling this incompatibility because he can't get it right, or if he doesn't get the answer right 100% of the
Yeah.
time, that like he just feels like so bad about himself, or just like
Yeah.
he feels good with everything else, but like he just feels like he can't get it right, and he doesn't necessarily want to get it right. Like he's emotionally disconnected to like kind of
Okay.
break himself before, um and he'll have moments of trying to like get it right. We have two kids, so we're fighting,
Okay.
we're trying to fight hard.
Okay.
um but on the other side, like my hope is, I guess, in the predictability of it,
Okay.
And he thought that that was interesting, to say it like that.
Which, what do you mean? Which part?
I guess the predictability of the cycles, or even that, like, if you do the right work or find the right people to help you, that a lot of these, issues can be worked
Mm-hmm.
through. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
I think, I guess my question is, like, I think both of our nervous systems are so, they just feel a little bit wrecked, like from
Yeah.
hurting each other. That, do you ever see that, like a couple that's able to work through the negative cycles? Like, we just get stuck in the same place.
Oh, yeah. No,
Cycles.
I mean,
Like,
listen, some people are going to be able to do that on their own, right? And just with self-help. I'm sorry. Some people don't even need to know the term set negative cycle. They just learn some better relationship skills that just naturally get them out of them, and lower the conflict. And then some people are going to respond really well to self-help, like what we're doing here. And some people are just, their nervous systems are going to hijack them either for personal reasons or because their relationship has just been so hard and their level of mistrust and distress is so high that they just can't overcome the nervous system dysregulation to settle in and really hear each other, right? And really
right,
understand each other and take turns and really lean into each other's experiences. And they're just not going to be able to get there on their own. And they might need personal help, someone who's there walking them through it, creating a safe environment, containing all the big feelings, doing the validation and stuff for them at first that they can't do for themselves, and helping them be safe with each other. And that might be where you guys are. I mean, but I absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't do what I do if couples couldn't escape negative cycles. I mean, in fact, there's a question here. I'll go ahead and move on, Alicia. I hope I answered your question. Thank
yeah,
you
I
for
was
sharing.
yeah, I was gonna just say, like, is
Yeah.
there anything, like, with the help, like, you do feel like nervous systems can be repaired? Like,
Abs- there's no doubt in my mind. Okay. There's not even a sliver of a doubt. Does that mean everybody will repair their nervous systems? No. I mean, sadly, some people aren't going to be motivated to do the work. Some people are going to be too scared to do the work. Some people are not going to get the right kind of help. Sadly, some people are, going to be up against a relationship that's so painful that it's really hard for them. So, but I see time and time and time and time again people learning to regulate themselves. And when they start improving their relationship, it starts to create co-regulation. And that in of itself helps everybody regulate. But in order to contribute in your part of relationship change, you have to be able to also regulate. So it's just a matter of like working both sides of the equation. But
yeah, yeah,
yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Okay,
Like,
so you're welcome. So someone on that note asked, have you seen couples get back together once they heal their attachment wounds on their own? Yes, I have. Now, they also need to do work with each other, but they can do the work with each other when they're not having to deal with their own wounds contaminating the relationship. It's easier to work with each other when you're not burning up inside, or just kind of completely disengaged. And the second season of the podcast, which isn't released yet, I don't know when is that released? Do we even know, Katrina? Do we even have a date? Anyway,
We don't
you
have
can
it
jump.
yet, but we're
Okay.
going to share one soon.
I mean, maybe like within the next 2 months, right? Would you say?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So once that gets released, you'll see that I work with this couple who, they've been separated for a year because their negative cycles were just out of control. One disorganized attachment, one avoidant attachment, lots of escalation at the beginning of the work and the sessions. And you know what? I don't know how many sessions in. We maybe did 20, I don't know, 22, Katrina, 23, and they're going to do it. They're doing it. They're back. They're not completely back together, but 20 sessions for a couple like that is like not very much. They're going to need more, but they're able to spend weekends together. They're able to stay out of negative cycles. They're both able to be vulnerable. They're both able to regulate. I mean, it's just absolute success. So if they can do it, anybody can do it. And just listen to that second season of the podcast to see how that change can take place. And I'll put this out there. They were both highly motivated, right? The disorganized partner, it took him a bit to get him out of blame. But once he got there, it was like, bam, we're moving. And, again, they were highly motivated to do the work.
Okay, Douglas is next. If you're
Okay. All right, Douglas.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, I'll try to get straight to the point. So I'm
Okay.
a recently ex of a disorganized attached partner.
Okay.
We had too many ruptures, I guess one too many for her, because we had learned about attachment styles. I had never heard of it before I met her.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought we were working through it. It's just, it didn't happen fast enough for her. But anyhow, so I've been
Okay.
doing work on my own. I'm giving her space. I'm not contacting her or whatever. I
Okay.
will say on your book, I've read 32 books on this kind of stuff, and yours has been
Wow.
the most helpful.
Well, good. Thank you.
So thank you. It
That's a
really
lot of
puts it,
books too. Good for
yeah,
you.
it just puts it in a perspective. But looking at my own attachment style, I'm a anxious avoidant. I had a childhood with 3 sisters, no brothers. I had an emotionally unavailable father. My mother obviously was stretched too thin. So
Mm-hmm.
I identify with all the characteristics of an anxious avoidant. And when I tried to bring up my
Okay.
needs to my my fearful avoidant or disorganized avoidant partner, obviously it felt like she was never paying attention to it. But my question
Yeah.
specifically is, I guess I found 2 wounds that I had as a child. Not only did I didn't feel like there was a place I could go for emotional support, but I had a father. It's like, it was never good enough kind of thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
kind of felt that in this relationship with her, because I went above and beyond to do everything I could for her. And I was wondering, is that related to anxious attachment? Is that a different kind of wound? Is that a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of issue? So I guess that's my.
No, absolutely. Because what's happening with that is, there's a lot of ways to explain it, but one way it's coming to mind is that your father is dealing with his own anxiety, right? Something about you being good enough or some level of perfection that he's expecting is more important than the relationship. If he's giving you messages, it's not good enough, and that's not being balanced out by what you are getting right. So the way that he regulates his anxiety is somehow with these perfectionistic standards and like a lot of negative feedback. And so now he is expecting you as a child to help you regulate his anxiety by being perfectionistic also. So he doesn't have to worry and fear that you're not going to make it in the world or you're not helping him out enough or whatever it is. He's needing you to be more than is a healthy expectation of what a child should be because of his own anxiety. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, and
Okay.
I felt
And
like that
so,
was somewhat played out in the relationship, because she was
yeah,
very much a perfectionist. Uh,
yep,
she excelled in school, she excelled at everything, and that was part of her own attachment, because
yeah,
she just had to run away from she had a chaotic home as a child, and her parents were unavailable to her because they had
yeah.
a special needs sibling, or she had a
Okay.
special needs sibling. So,
Okay.
um, and so I felt like, it was never good enough. But anyhow, I just didn't know if
Yeah.
it was something different or if it was all related to my. Uh,
Absolutely related.
okay,
You're gonna there's always exceptions to the rule, but very rarely are you going to find someone who has these symptoms in their life of being perfectionistic or whatever else they're acting out on that doesn't have an insecure attachment.
right,
It goes hand in hand because that's how they're trying to regulate their emotions. And we typically want our partner to help us regulate our own emotions in the way we do it. So if the way she regulates her anxiety is to be perfectionistic, she's wanting you to help her in the same way. Nobody's saying this though. And then when you don't do it, she experiences it as an emotional abandonment. Why isn't he being perfect? That's how I take care of, my anxiety. And then their anxiety sort of starts to take up all the space. And it goes beyond like reasonable expectations from a partner to help us out. You know, we got to help each other out in each other's language. That's part of being a good partner. But when it crosses the line into, I'm actually needing you to go above and beyond the call of duty because that's what helps me feel safe in the world, without recognizing you're a different human. Like you have other ways of being that aren't always in line with my way of doing things. And we need to honor both.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate that feedback. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome. And thank you for the feedback. I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Okay. So, Katrina, who's next?
Danielle.
Okay. Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
Oops. Sorry. I accidentally muted you
That's okay. I think I unmuted
instead of
my-
unmuted you. Okay. You're here.
You hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really want to just echo everyone else. I find your work to be phenomenal.
Thank you.
And really enjoy the way you explain attachment. I find it just really helps it land in a way that others, I feel like it can get very theoretical
Sure.
or sort of like into too many nuances, and yours is just really, really clear. So
Well,
thank
thank
you
you.
so much.
I'm honored to help.
Yes, I can tell. My question has to do with how abandonment at birth might affect attachment. So I had fairly severe birth trauma.
Okay.
Basically, when I was born, the doctor whisked me away to the ICU. I didn't get to touch my mother for 4 days. At that point, we were able to go home from the hospital, but then she herself had some trauma from the birth. She had to go back for
Okay.
another week. And then
Wow. Okay.
various people would kind of come and take care of me. So it's like I really only had time with her after 2 weeks. And I'm curious how that might affect attachment from your perspective.
Okay. Good question. So let me just preface this with I'm not even close to being an expert in birth trauma, and the nuances of how that can affect a baby or child. But I do know this. I know that the first year of, it's either the first year or 2 years of childhood, kind of before the toddlerhood phase, is the task of the baby that be developmentally healthy is called trust versus mistrust. So this is the time where we learn that we can trust that if we're in distress, someone's going to come along to help us. It's not verbal, but it's just a felt nervous system sense. And absolutely, babies can do start to develop an attachment style that early because their nervous systems start to cope with distress that's not getting helped. And if it is getting help, they're not in enough distress to feel like they have to do all these other things. But a baby that becomes anxious might, and listen, there's a lot of reasons babies cry. So I don't want to say that this is a sign of anxious attachment, but babies can learn early on that if they're not getting their needs met and they have to cry louder and get really, really upset to get responsiveness, because either, for whatever reason, then that is the early stages of an anxious attachment. And if they learn that, my mom starts panicking when I'm upset, then it might be better just to not cry. That's the early roots of an avoidant attachment. So with that said, yes, I mean, I would like to believe that, just a few days of this trauma is not enough if it's offset by a lot of good caretaking later. However, I do know nervous systems are very sensitive at that period of time, and it can set up patterns. And the pattern might look like, the baby is more agitated, more distressed, has less time to start learning how to regulate their nervous system. And that creates, a fussier baby. And then the fussier baby overwhelms the mom, who's already compromised by their own health issues. And that can sort of set up a bad pattern, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And, I would like to believe that that isn't enough to create someone who's just kind of broken forever. It might, though, contribute to some more challenging more challenges to their ability to self-regulate their own nervous system.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm definitely avoidant. Like I learned to
Mm-hmm.
just not have needs, not be
Okay.
emotional. Like my mom said, I only ever had one temper tantrum when I was 2, and it's because they drove for 10 hours on vacation. And
Oh,
otherwise, oh,
wow.
you were such a good baby. But really, I
Yeah.
suppressed everything. And I find now like I'm so hyper independent. And I'm just find it very difficult to access a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
emotions. And I'm questioning how I feel about my partner, but I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
it's because I don't like, am I just not able to access the feelings of how I feel about this person, or do I not feel this way? Like I feel a lot of confusion
Mm-hmm.
around that.
Well, I mean, your feelings are real. It's just how are you dealing with them, whether they're coming from your own intrapsychic stuff or they're coming from your relationship and your partner, the way your partner's behavior is impacting you. It's really a matter of like, how are you dealing with those feelings? And let me ask you this, really quickly though, did you grow up in an environment that kind of reminds you of what I describe about the avoidant environment?
Yeah, I would say both of my parents were avoidant.
Okay, so I'm gonna guess that that had more of an impact on your avoidance than
Mm,
some birth stuff.
okay.
Um, and that's my opinion. But yeah, I mean, it's really your work is just to learn to be able to more fully access your emotions, regardless of how they got there, right? That's the first step. And then once you can fully access that, it's a matter of listening to them and going, what are these feelings that I'm learning and finding in myself? What are they needing to feel better? Um, and from there, it's some of those answers are going to be how can you support yourself emotionally and learn to re-engage, and how can your partner help you with those feelings by either shifting their behavior so they're not triggered so much to begin with, or, that's the relationship help, or comforting you or whatever. A lot of times with someone who's really shut down avoidant, there's some anger and stuff in there that they're shutting it all down. And
Mhm.
so you might need sometimes the activation of the emotional engagement is going to have to start with the layer of anger and a healthy approach to it.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're kind of, I want to see if anyone has something that's very, very specific about what to do with the information in chapter 2. This part of, I mean, chapter 3, this part of the book, there's not a ton of actionable steps yet. We haven't really moved into how to do the work. We're laying the intellectual foundation here. Um, but if you have a really specific question about just how to how to do this, which most of you are asking about, and then after this question, we'll move into maybe some like 15 minutes of broader questions. Someone says, how, on average, how long does it take people to heal from their insecure attachment? Honestly, the not so great answer that nobody wants to hear is it's kind of a lifelong journey of growth, really. It's just, I mean, do you ever get out of a situation where you have to learn how to deal with your feelings in a healthier way or communicate with your partner in a healthy way? Probably not, because more stress just keep, I mean, as we get older, there's just different forms of stress that come at us and new novel situations that we don't quite know how to deal with, aging parents or whatever. And we're just always having new opportunities to learn how to better respond to ourselves and better communicate with our partner. With that said, getting to just a place of relative security, is going to be heavily dependent on where you're starting from. I mean, if someone's starting from a really extreme disorganized attachment, it's going to take them a while because they've got more work to do. They've got to learn more about self-regulation, more about building trust, more, and so I don't know, let's say, if I'm working with someone intensely, I mean, I would say I can probably get someone the foundation built in a matter of weeks. I mean, I've been doing these intensives now where I'm working with people just marathon of, 7 days of 2 hours a day. And that's getting them here really quickly. I mean, but then, of course, once they're done with that piece of work, then they have to work to maintain it. Um, if someone is starting off with a really bad disorganized attachment and to move fully to secure, I mean, it might take them, 10 years of self-work or lots of forward and backward, or it may take them 5 years. Really, it just depends on so many factors. It's like learning a foreign language. How long does it take to learn a foreign language? Well, it really depends on where you're starting, and it depends on, how much time you have to devote to it, and how smart you are to begin with. So, wish I could answer that better, but all I know is this: any growth just helps you feel better in the world. It's all a success. Now, there is no such thing as linear growth. People move 2 steps and they go back a step. They move 3 steps and they go back 5 steps, and they move 10 steps. But if you can look back and a month out or 5 months out or a year out, and you can look back and say, hey, I've gotten better in this area. You're growing. Just try to accept yourself where you are and be appreciative for the growth that you have, with the mindset that you still have more work to do. How to deal with the guilt of letting a relationship go? Well, that is really going to depend on what the meaning you make of yourself is that you let the relationship go. Are you making meaning of it is, hey, this wasn't working for me. It was putting me in a really bad place. It was hurting me individual. We weren't able to get where we needed to be. And so it was a healthy decision. There was wisdom in my decision to move away, even though we can't always know if, a decision is the right one or wrong one. We just can't always know that. Sometimes we just have to go forward. And I did the best I could, and there's a lot of grief there, and I had to let go of the good stuff too. And that's really sad. That is going to get you out of guilt. If you're doing the other thing and you're saying, well, I'm a failure, I failed, I shouldn't have left them, I'm bad for doing it, and what does that mean about me as a person? And I should have tried harder, and you're making sense of it in that way, then you are going to feel guilt. And in that case, you need to unpack that. You need to figure out like what's getting in the way of you making peace with the situation. Is it because you grew up with messages that you're kind of responsible for everything? Or if you can't make everything work, you're a failure. And maybe there's some healing that you need to do around that. You need to figure out like what's the guilt trying to do? How's guilt is any bad emotion, or I'm sorry, not bad, painful emotion is trying to keep us safe in some way. There's a function to it. And sometimes, even though it's not working, we need to kind of figure out the function of that guilt and kind of try to honor the function of it before we try to get rid of it. There's just a lot of layers to it. But, at the end of the day, you do have to kind of keep repeating to yourself when you get in these moments where the guilt starts to overwhelm you. You do really need to keep repeating to yourself, there was wisdom in my choice, and here's why. And I did the best I could with what I had. And, what would it have looked like if I stayed in that? Emotional trauma is, first of all, emotional abandonment, consistent experiences of not getting validation, heard, understood, seen, having your emotions be held and comforted and had space for, learning to, have someone help you learn to do your emotions with health. That's one side of it. And then it really becomes traumatic when there's more like you're getting shamed for your emotions. You're getting punished if you show emotions. The responses are just far more damaging than, we have invalidation over here, and, you know, that's not invalidation can be very, very damaging, especially chronically. But we have some invalidation over here, and that's emotional damage, and it's emotionally insensitive. But we move into trauma when we're put in situations that are extremely emotionally overwhelming, that as a child, like you just don't know how to deal with. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, all create emotional trauma. serious abandonments by a parent, even not intentionally, and not having the right kind of help with those emotions. It's not so much the trauma itself, the event, the death, the abuse. It's not so much the event that contributes to the emotional trauma. It's not having a healthy way to process the event. That's really what gets kids is, you know, are the events going away? First of all, if there's some sort of bad abuse taking place, that needs to stop. We can't expect to give them emotional support while they're dealing with ongoing serious trauma, but it's really, does that child have a place to process what's going on? And if not, it's going to create just a lot of emotional dysregulation and overwhelm. Do you have a resource that talks about the function of emotions? Oh yeah, do I ever? My shame workshop, the anxious self work workshop I'm working on is just a deep dive into the function. Every exercise involves honoring the function of the emotion. The podcast does function of emotion. I mean, I never really work without addressing function of emotion. I'm sure it's in the book. Yeah, I think in the book where I go through the different emotions that we'll get to in the later chapters, definitely talk about why these emotions are good and keep us safe. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's do Tristan, and then we'll try to get to more here. Okay, Tristan. And then I think,
Can
who
you hear me?
else? Hi,
Hi.
how you doing?
Hi, good. I just started reading your book,
Okay.
but I guess my main question is trying to figure out for sure which style of insecure attachment I fall into, because
Okay.
I definitely have some symptoms from the disorganized attachment on the more anxious side.
Okay.
Uh, I've noticed in the later years of my uh, 18 years with my husband, I kind of am avoidant now.
Okay.
And I don't know. I mean, it seems like you kind of need to know what your attachment style is in order to start working on uh, repairing it.
Let me address that. You don't really. What you do need to know is that you have an insecure attachment and what the symptoms are. Really, that's what you need to know. The symptoms can be categorized, but you don't need it. It can be helpful to know because you can kind of go, all right, I'm gonna this hits, this hits, this hits. What's the help for that? But really, you're just going to have to be more in touch with the symptoms. Like, okay, you said I have a disorganized attachment, so that means that maybe sometimes your symptoms are to, kind of like say, I'm done with this relationship and then go back in. And so now we have to work on that behavior. Or sometimes you just kind of stuff everything down. Now we have to work on what's going on in this moment that you're needing to stuff your feelings down. So does that make sense that if you don't know the style, you just really have to pay attention to the symptoms?
Yes, it
Okay.
does. But I guess a little further into that question would be I've gotten pretty good at recognizing the symptoms in myself.
Okay.
Um, but how do I get my husband on board with working on things?
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to, the first thing is understanding the value of working on yourself independent of what your husband's doing. I just need for people to really understand that there's so much value for doing this work on you and learning to deal with your own emotional self in a new way, even when our partner isn't isn't coming along with us. It's like there's an impact of an insecure attachment in all these behaviors on you, and there's an impact on the relationship. And sometimes people get stuck with, well, if it's not going to positively impact the relationship and shift that, what's the point? And I need to be like, no, there's an impact on you personally of these behaviors. And that really needs to be the driving force behind the change. Okay. So that said, there's different options, depending on the block. I don't know his block, so it's hard to say exactly what to do, but I know what many people have been successful with. One is being clear about what you want and why. And that is without coming in with heat or blame. And a lot of times, well, I'll do that in the second part of the answer, but it's kind of coming in with like, I need to feel safe and close to you. Like I'm needing for us to get out of these negative cycles. I'm needing for us to both kind of really own and look at our parts here so we can start shifting it, because wouldn't it be nice if we didn't keep circling back to this same bad place over and over for the next 18 years, the next 30 years, I don't want us to have to do that. And I'm willing to work on my own part here. That's one way of delivery. Oh, by the way, there is a section of the book that talks about how to present this information. And then the second way is to validate whatever their resistance is, because whatever their resistance to doing the work is, there's wisdom in it. It doesn't work to not do work, but there's always wisdom in why someone would be resistant. Maybe they associate working on it with, if we start working on it, it's going to open up all this stuff that we don't know what to do with, or it's going to make things worse. Or, people I see that work on their relationship get stuck just constantly talking about working on their relationship and they're never enjoying the moment. And so I would just try to be really curious, like what's going on that this kind of feels like a threat to you, and validate that, which is, okay, I'm hearing you. Like, I get it. You're scared. You don't want things to get worse. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that, you're trying to protect the relationship, and just leave it for a while and then come in, let that simmer, because that is relationship work. That doesn't mean you like their decision, and that doesn't mean you're okay with sticking to that or agree. But later, then you come in after they've felt kind of heard and validated and say, I know you've got these good reasons, but I need for you to hear my good reasons too. I really need some validation that where I'm coming from about why we do need to do this together. Sometimes if things are really bad, then it takes healthy assertion, which is, I'm just not okay with what we're doing. I'm just not okay with it. And if we can't get out of this, like here are the consequences. Here's what, I don't know if it has to go to, I won't be able to stay in this relationship. That's really a personal issue depending on your circumstances, but it might be like, I'm going to I might end up just emotionally disengaging because it's too painful to keep going, doing the same thing over and over. And then, the biggest point to make is really, if you start working on you and you start showing up in new ways, which both of what I just said are examples of that, that starts to create a safer environment. Yes, it requires one partner to maybe take on the burden more than the other. That needs to be temporary. That isn't workable in a lasting way. But sometimes one partner does need to step up and do what they can to create more safety and openness. And over time, that other partner will start softening and start feeling like safer doing their part of the work too. It also, if you're showing up as your best self, it really puts them in a position to look, to really have to look at their own blocks. It becomes harder for them to blame you. So the answer really always lies in you showing up in a new way. And the hope is that eventually they come on board with you. But the reality is that you can feel healthy as a person and not feel so healthy in the relationship if you're not getting your emotional needs met. And that partner does have a role in that. There's no way that you can feel safe in a relationship unless both partners are really working at that. So, sometimes there is a point where you have to say, I've done everything I can. I've done everything I'm willing to do, and we're still not there. And how am I going to deal with this going forward? So I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay.
Luke is next.
Who?
Luke.
Okay, Luke. Hi.
Hi, I'm joining from the UK. I hope you can hear me okay.
Oh, welcome. I can. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I think you are literally an angel for the work that you
Oh,
do.
thank you.
And me and my partner have, been married for 10 years and we've been to 3 couples therapists, and you were the first resource that talked about attachment therapy, and it's been the most useful attachment theory, and it's been the most useful thing that we've ever come across in terms of
Amazing.
talking about it. Obviously, again, still got a long way to go, but specifically about this chapter, we basically we bought the book, we listened to the podcast, really looking forward to season 2 because I think that's going to be really
Yeah.
relevant for us. We worked on the assumption for a long time. I mean, I'm definitely avoidant, and the assumption that my partner was anxious. She definitely has a lot of anxiety, and I think just recently realized that actually she is probably more of a disorganized.
Okay.
Had quite a lot of trauma in childhood and growing up, and I guess I think we're really trying to contemplate how we proceed from here. Obviously, the work in your book, but I think partly, we've had lots of ruptures, and there's over the course of our relationship, and there's a lot of kind of built up, I think, mistrust from both sides. I think both of us are definitely scared of being hurt, and I think it's really a question of trying to decide whether we can do this together, while sort of living in the same space and sharing a house. We have 2 kids together, so obviously that plays into it.
Yeah.
But just whether, I think you've kind of answered this in some of the previous questions, but how we evaluate how to sort of best take this forward, our own sort of development journeys, and also kind of when to say, it's not
Yeah.
working. But yeah, at the moment we're both still committed, but I'd love to hear
Okay.
your thoughts on that.
All right, let me ask you this. First question, are you guys both able to one at a time, in a moment, one person be in the sharing role where they get to, and they're responsible for, sharing in a healthy way and not just coming in with attacks and showing some vulnerability, but one person is able to talk about their feelings no matter what they are, even like, I hold some resentment for this and
Yeah.
this left me alone. And the other person is really fully able to engage in that, lean in, validate that, and put their own stuff to the side and make space for that. Are both of you able to do that for each other?
With a lot of conscious effort and kind of setting the ground for it, yes, we can.
Okay, so that's the first thing. That's what the first thing I need to see happen. So, if you're not able to do that consistently, then we need to understand why we're not, why that person in the supportive role isn't able to hold that and stay with that person. Maybe it's their block, maybe it's something on both ends. So that would be the first question, because usually if that can happen consistently, people will start to heal. Now, there's another part of that equation where we do have to also see behavior change around whatever isn't working. If someone's getting dysregulated and getting really mean, we have to see that change. What is it about that person's trigger that they can't tolerate it to the point where they can regulate and not work on their move in the cycle? So we need, 1, this free-flowing communication, 2, consistent behavior change, and 3, if, this is what I always say when it's really time to consider calling it, is have you on your end really put in what you can? Like, do you really feel like, look, I've done the best I can to my capability and willingness, It doesn't mean you've tried perfectly, but you've done what you can on your end, and really nothing seems to be shifting, and you don't have hope that things will shift, right? Sometimes things aren't shifting super fast, but we can step back and go, all right, we are growing, and we can assume that if we keep working on this, we'll just keep growing together.
Yeah.
But if you have no hope, that you kind of say 5 years from now, I think we're probably going to be in the same boat because we're not really, for whatever reason, able to get there. Then that's the moment where you might really need to like ask yourself what you should do going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of whether we get to that place separately or together, do you have any feeling about
Mhm.
what you've seen, whether you've, whether it's actually helpful when it has been helpful, or, my fear is that
Yeah.
if we do, do that work on ourselves, which we both acknowledge we need to do because we're both struggling with those first two questions, the communication
Yeah.
and then the behaviors, you know, my fear would be that as soon as we do that, the easy option will just be to kind of drift further apart and not do the work. But I don't know.
Hmm.
Have you seen cases where that has been the right decision and it has
To
worked?
to just break up.
Well, to separate for a period of time while we do that work and make
Oh,
a
I see.
decision.
I see. Okay. Yes, I have. When couples can't get out of their negative cycles because they just one or both gets too dysregulated and they just can't seem to regulate, they might need to separate and get out of the fire for a while and learn to, kind of get out of the toxicity of the environment, let their nervous system settle a bit, learn some more regulation skills, kind of do some self work, and then slowly come back. I mean, with the podcast I was talking about, they needed to start coming to therapy together and having that be safe experiences. And then they needed to start, spending a few hours together and letting that build up safety. And then eventually spending weekends together. And, they're moving toward, more and more extended periods of time together where they're building up confidence that they can do this together. And yeah, I don't, there are situations where I recommend that people need to split up. Yeah, for sure. And then, um, I was going to say something else. Oh, I also have seen situations where it is better for two people to go separate ways. And I know this sounds so cliche, but it truly isn't my job to keep couples together. My experience, the vast majority of the time that does happen. But sometimes there's other layers, like just real incompatibilities. One wants kids, the other one doesn't. Or there's been some sort of such level of betrayal that one partner just can't, they're not angry anymore, but they just can't re-engage. They just have developed such a level of contempt for that person that you can't really break through that. And it doesn't even have to be contempt. It's just, I no longer kind of like this person for who they are. And in that situation, that it's probably not workable. And so my job is really to get people really clear about either helping them reconnect or really get clear about why they're not able to reconnect. And are those blocks, can we work through those blocks? Is it possible to work through those blocks? And so, what I would like to see is if people, the best case scenario is people developing a lot of clarity because, if you do need to break up for healthy, important reasons and you don't have a ton of clarity, both partners are going to go off not really knowing what they need to work on to prevent the problem in the future, but also, should we have stayed together? It's confusing. Not really being able to make sense of the problem, blaming themselves for giving up too soon. So I hope that helps.
That was amazing. Yeah, and
Okay.
you're amazing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, we'll do one more, and then if there is one more, and then Do you have any advice for two opposing trains of thought about reconnecting emotionally and sex? My partner thinks that the only way forward is to have more sex, but I feel very unsafe in the relationship. He thinks that sex will help me feel safe, and he can't see my point at all. I feel such pressure around it and feel so stuck. Okay. So the first thing is why are you two having a hard time tolerating each other's perspective? Both of you have truth in what you're saying. Okay. And so we need to take turns. We need to have one of you just be like, you know what? You've got the mic. I'm going to hear you. I'm going to understand you. You might not agree with how they're choosing to handle the situation logistically. You might not agree with them, but you do need to lean into understanding, which is your partner might be like, look, I connect through sex. That's how, you know, I feel close. And it breaks my heart to not be able to connect with you in that way. And then that leaves me feeling kind of unsafe and not sure if my needs are going to get met. And, so for me, it does make sense that we just figure out a way to have sex and that will open me up to, you know, meeting you where you are. I understand there's problems with that logic. Don't get me wrong, me, Julie, as a person, I understand there's problems with that logic, but I also understand that that is logical to them and that needs to be leaned into. And if the goal is to move them out of that logic, that's really the only way that that's going to happen is by making space for it. And so making it safe. And because only one person is going to be able to question that logic, and that's them. And sometimes the more we push people to question their own logic, the more they double down. So give it some space, lean into it. I get it. I'm really hearing you. I get how lonely it leaves you feeling. I feel lonely without talking about our feelings, and you feel lonely without the physical connection. And I'm really, I feel that with you. I'm sorry for my role in that. I'm sorry that I have a block that makes it very difficult for me to want to have sex when we're not connected. I have a role in that. Again, you're not the goal isn't to take it all on, and the goal is certainly not to have that used against you. That's part of your partner's responsibility here. But just lean into that, give it some space. Maybe they even need to say, I have some resentment for you around this. I know you're not doing it on purpose, but yeah, there's a part of me that really resents that I'm not getting my needs met over here. Okay, now what's the flip side of that? Later that day or the next day or whatever, now their turn is to hear and listen. And you get to say your part, which is, I've got some resentment here too. And it's hard for me to have sex when I feel disconnected. And it's hard for me to go there. I'm just craving this other kind of connection. And when I don't feel safe, my body kind of shuts down and it creates this cascade of problems for me. And that's not what I want. I'm feeling lonely over here too. And their job is to really lean into that and validate it and just see where you're coming from. Their job isn't to say, okay, fine, I don't want sex. Their job is to just really hear you and understand you and validate that. And that right there can do a lot of healing, because when couples can connect in that way and stop battling each other, a lot of times you're just going to see those symptoms start to take care of themselves. And on top of that, if your partner is getting space to engage and talk about their feelings, that is emotional closeness. That is having a safe conversation that's not like, you're just withholding from me. It's the way, if you can do that in a way that is healthy, that's the safety. That's the emotional engagement that you're needing. And so you're using the trigger, you're using the unmet needs as a means to the connection, instead of they're trying to share their feelings with you in a blaming way, and you're pushing away their feelings because you're not hearing about it. And even if you were hearing about it, you would go into, well, that's not fair. And your trigger would take over their feelings. And so we really got to be able to hold. So I would start there. I would start with getting out of the opposing thought. You've already talked about that 1,000 times. You guys know you have opposing thoughts. But now we need to kind of lean into each other and start creating some safety. And when you start to get that safety, the idea is that you start opening up to sex more. And when they start to be heard and validated for their perspective, instead of told they're just, wrong for thinking that, then they start feeling more safe engaging emotionally. Okay, so you understand where my partner is coming from with wanting sex, but it's not making me feel safe. So now what? Well, see, right now, you just left their experience and went into your own trigger, right? We know it's not making you feel safe. That there's truth to that. But there's also truth, you're impacted by their desire, right? But there's also truth in their desire, and you need to just stay there for a while before going into but. Okay, you got to stay out of but for a while, not forever, but for a while to lean in. You want them to lean into you, you're going to have to lean into them. Lean into it. You don't have to say, this is making me feel safe. In fact, you can say later when it's your turn, you can talk about that unsafety. But first, you need to give some space to them understanding where you're coming from, and they need to give you space before they go, all right, fine, I hear you, but that doesn't work in relationships ever. Okay, so you got to lean in, everybody needs space. Okay, if you can't give that space because you get anxious and your nervous system goes into somehow leaving them, you got to figure out why you're leaving them. And put words to that. There's a good reason for it. The reason is because you don't want to stay feeling unsafe. And you have this idea that if you lean into what they're saying, they're going to just do more of it. And they're not going to stop doing what they're doing. You can't give someone space if you're too scared to give them space. You have to take that risk. It's vulnerable to give someone space. You have to take that risk. If weeks or months later or whatever, you're leaning in and you're really trying to hear and understand them, and you're not getting that in return, and you're still not feeling safe, then we have to figure out what's going on. But you have to at least go there and try it. My partner is avoidant. Any slight negative comment, if I remind him to do a task as he might not done, he feels a failure. How do I communicate that if I don't feel he is a failure or think bad of him if a mistake is made? Well, first of all, I'm going to start with, communicating to him. That's frustrating. Okay. It's really frustrating when you need help and you can't ask for help because it's not safe to ask for help, because he's going to go into a shame spiral. And then now, not only are you not getting the help, but now you're having to deal with his shame spiral. And so what can you do with that? Well, one is you can communicate your needs, feelings and needs to him, which is in a safe way, right? Which is, hey, we got to talk about this because I want to honor your need for not having to feel like a failure. And I want to know how I can help you better not to feel like a failure. But at the same time, I do need to help, right? And it's really hard on me if I'm not able to reach and ask for help because, then you go into your stuff, then that leaves me feeling alone with it. And that doesn't work either. So can we work together here to try to figure out a way that you can feel successful and I can get the help I'm needing? All right. So there's the first thing. Now, the second thing is, what is your role here? Do you have a role? If you're delivering things in the most perfect way possible and you're really trying to hear and understand where they're coming from, and this is really truly just appropriate teamwork needs, then the block is 100% on them. However, a lot of times we do have a role and we need to look at that role. Okay, so one possible role. Do you have standards that aren't the same as his? And there's really nothing wrong with his standards. They're just not quite as perfectionistic as yours. And you're needing for him to meet you in your perfectionistic standards because that's how you regulate your own emotions. If that's part of the problem, which I have no idea if it is, I do see this a lot, then that's not really fair to him to ask him to regulate you in the same way you regulate you if that's not really who he is. Now, it is appropriate for each other to help each other. Sometimes we do have to lean in to our partner's wants. This isn't so important to me, but I know it's important to them, so I'm going to help them out. But we also need to, on the flip side of that, be like, hey, this isn't, my partner isn't the type that's gonna, they have other things to do than maybe have everything spotless all the time. And I need to help them with that. I need to help them with their, need to relax sometimes. Another thing that you could be contributing to is, are you giving a lot of messages that they're not successful and not a lot of messages that they are? Are we balancing the good out with the bad? And yeah, those are the two things I can think of. Or are you delivering your messages as, demands or protests or criticisms? That's going to potentially get in the way and create negative cycles around these conversations. And if I had your partner here, I would be asking them the same question. Like, I want to look at, maybe what your partner is doing that's contributing to your shame spirals, and how can you ask them for help? And I also need to know, are you contributing to this in any way that you might need to work on? And then when your partner says, I feel like a failure, lean into it instead of arguing with that and saying, well, you shouldn't feel like a failure. I'm just asking for your help. First, lean in and kind of try to understand what's going on with that, right? What's causing you to feel like a failure? What do you say about that? See if you can make a little space for that and assume that maybe there's some truth to it. And then also, you're going to need for them to lean into you at some point and try to understand what it's like for you to not be able to reach them without them getting consumed with their own trigger and going away. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll pick back up next week on chapter 4. So go ahead and do your homework, and then we'll come back and have a couple questions about the homework, and then we'll kind of do the same thing that we did today. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. If you have time, please go to Amazon and review the book. That always helps get the word out. If you have a second, and you've, of course, an honest review. So that would be much, much appreciated from my end. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.